The night was restless. The small ceiling fan creaked as it rotated, pushing warm air around the room but offering no relief from the heavy tension that hung there. In the dim glow of a single lantern, a young woman sat by the edge of the bed. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, her face buried in her hands. She was 22 years old, and her life had already been carved by hardship. She had known poverty, hunger, and humiliation. But nothing compared to the cruel weight pressing down on her heart now. Her mother was dying. Her name was Eudora. To anyone who passed her on the street, she was just another girl with tired eyes and calloused palms. A girl who carried herself with dignity despite the shadows of hardship clinging to her. But tonight, dignity felt like a luxury she could not afford. Her mother, the only parent she had ever known, was lying weak on a hospital bed. The doctors had been blunt. Without immediate surgery, she would not survive. And the cost of that surgery was a mountain Eudora could not climb. Life had never been kind to Eudora's family. Her father had died when she was only 8, leaving her mother, Ngozi, to shoulder the burden of raising her alone. Ngozi worked endlessly as a petty trader in the market, selling vegetables and dried fish under the burning sun. Every day she had returned home exhausted, but she always smiled for her daughter, always found a way to put food on the table. Eudora had watched her mother sacrifice everything, her comfort, her health, her dreams, just to keep her alive. And now, when it was her turn to give back, fate had tied her hands. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and despair. The sound of coughing, groaning, and hurried footsteps followed Eudora each time she came to see her mother. She would sit by the bed, clutching her mother's frail hand, pretending to be strong. But each time she walked out, her face would crumble and tears would stain her blouse. The surgery would cost 10 million naira. To many, it was the price of a luxury car, a business investment, or a week's holiday abroad. But to Eudora, it was a mountain that would take lifetimes to climb. She had tried everything. She begged her relatives, but they too were drowning in their own struggles. She knocked on the doors of neighbors, who gave what little they could, but it wasn't enough to make a difference. She even approached moneylenders, but their demands were cruel, the interest rates monstrous. The clock was ticking, and every passing day brought her mother closer to death. She took up jobs no one else wanted. She cleaned houses, washed clothes, and even worked overnight at a bakery, her body aching and her spirit breaking. Yet, after weeks of labor, the money she gathered was a drop of water in a desert. Each time she returned to the hospital, the doctor's gaze grew colder, less hopeful. Each time she looked at her mother's fragile body, her chest tightened with guilt. It was during one of these nights of despair that the seed of an unthinkable idea was planted. A friend, an old schoolmate, noticed her struggle. The girl had changed since their school days. Her skin was fairer now, her clothes expensive, her phone a glittering object of envy. At first, Eudora thought she had found success in business, perhaps relocated abroad. But one evening, when the conversation turned to Eudora's problems, the truth spilled out. The girl leaned close and whispered about a world Eudora had never imagined. A world where desperate girls sold the one thing men with power and money craved, their innocence. There were billionaires, she said, who paid outrageous sums to be the first. A girl's virginity was a treasure in this secret marketplace, valued not for love but for lust, ego, and control. For some men it was a sport. For others, it was an obsession. And for girls like Eudora, it was the fastest escape from poverty. At first, Eudora had laughed bitterly. The thought was absurd, repulsive. She could never, she told herself, trade her dignity, her purity, for money. But as the days passed, the laughter faded, replaced by a haunting echo of that conversation. Each time her mother coughed, each time the doctors reminded her of the cost, the idea crept back like a shadow she could not shake off. Nights became battlegrounds of thought. She would sit awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, asking herself impossible questions. Was virginity worth more than her mother's life? Was her pride more valuable than the woman who had given everything for her? She thought of her father's death, of her mother's sacrifices, of the countless times Ngozi had gone hungry so that she could eat. Could she really stand by and watch her die, just because she clung to a purity that, in the grand scheme of things, meant nothing? Her heart ached with shame each time she considered it, but her mind whispered, "This is the only way." The friend connected her to a broker, a middle-aged woman who moved in elite circles. The woman's tone was cold, professional, as if she were arranging the sale of a commodity. She explained that men would bid. The highest bidder would pay not just for a night, but for the ownership of her first experience. Adaora sat through the call trembling, her throat dry, her palms sweaty. It felt like a nightmare, and yet it was her reality. She was asked to undergo tests, proof of her health, proof of her virginity. She submitted herself to the humiliation of it all, her tears flowing silently as the doctor confirmed what she already knew. The broker's voice carried a hint of satisfaction when she called back, "You will be in high demand." The bid began quietly, discreetly. She was not allowed to know the names of those involved, only the amounts. Each new figure announced by the broker made her chest tighten further. 2 million. 4 million. 6. By the time the highest bidder sealed it at 12 million naira, Adaora felt as if she had been carved open. Her mother's surgery could be paid for. But the cost would be her soul. On the evening of the arrangement, Adaora prepared herself in silence. She wore a plain dress, the same slippers she always wore, and carried nothing but her phone. Her eyes were hollow, her steps mechanical. She felt as though she were marching to her own execution. The broker sent a car, a black SUV that gleamed like oil under the streetlights. The driver opened the door, his expression blank, as though this were just another routine. Adaora climbed in, her body tense, her breath shallow. The city blurred past the tinted windows, lights and shadows blending into one another as her mind raced. She thought of her mother, lying unconscious, her chest rising and falling weakly. She thought of her father's grave, the promises she had once made to herself about dignity, honor, and love. And she thought of what awaited her at the end of this ride. The car pulled into the driveway of a towering hotel, its glass walls reflecting the night sky like a jewel. Wealth oozed from every corner, valets in uniform, guests in gowns and tuxedos, chandeliers glowing through the glass doors. Adaora felt small, invisible, unworthy. She walked through the lobby in silence, her slippers making soft sounds on the polished floor. An elevator ride later, she found herself standing before a suite door. The driver handed her a key card and left without a word. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at the door as though it were a portal to another world. Her heart pounded violently, her palms slick with sweat. This was it, the threshold between who she had been and who she was about to become. She slid the card into the slot. The light blinked green. Slowly, the door opened with a soft click. The room was bathed in golden light, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne. The curtains were drawn back to reveal a breathtaking view of the city. And there, standing by the window with a glass of wine in his hand, was the man who had bought her first night. Her breath caught in her throat. And just like that, Adaora's life was no longer her own. The door closed behind her with a soft thud, sealing her fate inside that golden cage of wealth and power. For a moment, Adaora could not breathe. The man by the window turned slowly, his silhouette framed by the sprawling lights of the city below. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura that filled the room even before his words reached her. His face, illuminated by the warm glow of the chandelier, revealed a man in his 40s. His features were sharp, sculpted by years of discipline, yet softened by something unreadable, an emptiness, perhaps, or a loneliness money could not fill. This was him, the billionaire who had paid 12 million naira for her innocence. He set the glass down on the table and walked toward her, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Adaora stood frozen near the door, her hands trembling, her throat dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her mind whispered the truth she could not escape. Her mother's life depended on this moment. The billionaire's eyes swept over her, not with the hunger she expected, but with the calm appraisal of a man who always got what he wanted. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady, unwavering. "You're nervous," he said softly. The words, though simple, sliced through her silence. Adaora could not reply. She lowered her eyes, gripping the strap of her bag until her knuckles whitened. Good, he continued. You should be. But tonight is not about fear. It is about choice. And you made yours. His voice was deep, controlled, the kind that carried authority without effort. He turned away, motioning toward the table where an envelope lay neatly placed beside a pen. Your money is there. All of it. Count it if you wish. Adora's eyes flickered to the envelope. Her heart pounded harder. That envelope was her mother's second chance at life, her only escape from the jaws of death. But it was also the price of her purity. She stepped forward hesitantly, her legs weak, and sat at the edge of the chair. She opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, stacks of crisp notes lay neatly arranged, the weight of them far heavier than paper should be. She did not count. She simply stared at it, the tears she had been fighting burning behind her eyes. The billionaire watched her silently. He seemed to study not her body, but her struggle, as if her torment fascinated him more than the transaction itself. Finally, he spoke again. You should understand something, he said. This is not charity. This is not kindness. This is a contract between us. You give me what I want. I give you what you need. Nothing more, nothing less. The words cut through her like glass. She nodded slowly, though her voice could not find the strength to respond. He walked to the bar, poured himself another drink, and gestured toward the balcony. Come. She obeyed, her movements stiff, mechanical. Outside, the city stretched beneath them like a field of stars. The air was cool, carrying the faint sounds of traffic far below. For a moment, silence hung between them. Do you know why men like me do this? He asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on the skyline. Adora shook her head. Because money buys everything, except the thrill of owning what no one else has touched. His gaze shifted to her, sharp and unflinching. Adora are a prize. Not because of who you are, but because of what you represent. Innocence. Purity. Untainted flesh. That is why I paid. Her stomach turned, her hands gripping the railing tightly. She wanted to scream, to curse him, to run. But she swallowed it all. She thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, and she forced herself to endure. When he reached for her hand, she flinched. He smiled faintly, almost amused. Relax, he murmured. I don't bite. Not unless you want me to. Those words sent shivers down her spine. The night that followed was not what Adora had imagined. It was awkward, suffocating, and raw. There was no romance, no tenderness, no love. Only the weight of a transaction. She closed her eyes and let her body go numb, clinging to the thought that every second she endured was another heartbeat for her mother. When it was finally over, she curled into herself on the edge of the bed, her body trembling, her soul aching. The billionaire sat nearby, silent, sipping his drink as though nothing monumental had occurred. For him, it was routine. For her, it was the shattering of everything she had ever believed about herself. She expected him to dismiss her, to send her away like a discarded object. But instead, he spoke with a calmness that unsettled her. You did well, he said. Better than I expected. Adora said nothing. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. I want to see you again. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. She had thought this was a one-time ordeal, a nightmare to endure and forget. No, she whispered, her voice hoarse. But the billionaire only smiled. Think carefully, Adora. You've tasted what my money can do. Your mother will need more than one surgery. Recovery takes time. Bills will continue. And you, he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, you will come to understand that survival demands sacrifice. Her chest tightened. She hated him in that moment. Hated his arrogance, his certainty, his power. But more than anything, she hated herself for knowing he was right. The following morning, the driver returned to take her home. She clutched the envelope tightly, her body numb, her spirit hollow. The world outside looked the same, cars, people, noise, but she felt forever altered. She was no longer Adora the innocent. She was Adora the sold. At the hospital, she handed the money over. The doctor's eyes widened at the sight of it. Papers were signed, procedures scheduled. Her mother was rushed into surgery, And for the first time in weeks, hope flickered like a candle in the darkness. Hours stretched into eternity as Ada Ora sat in the waiting room, her hands clasped in desperate prayer. Finally, the surgeon emerged, his face serious but calm. "She will live," he announced. Relief washed over Ada Ora in waves. She fell to her knees, sobbing, thanking God for the miracle she had bought with her body. That night, she sat by her mother's bedside, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Her heart was heavy with conflicting emotions, joy for her mother's survival, sorrow for the price she had paid. She promised herself she would never go back to that man, never again submit to his demands. But fate is cruel. 3 days later, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, but she recognized the voice in the words immediately. "Come to me. This isn't over." Her blood ran cold. The choice she thought she had made once and for all was waiting for her again, like a shadow that refused to let her go. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and relief. For the first time in weeks, Ada Ora could sit by her mother's side without the weight of death pressing down on her shoulders. The surgery had been successful. Her mother was stable. Each slow, steady breath her mother took was a silent victory, a reminder that the sacrifice had not been in vain. But peace is fragile, and fate does not allow it to linger. 3 days after the surgery, Ada Ora's phone vibrated. She had been dozing on the hospital chair, her head resting against the wall. When she picked it up, the message was short, chilling, and undeniable. "Come to me. This isn't over." Her heart dropped into her stomach. She read it once, twice, 3 times, hoping the words would change. But they didn't. The billionaire had returned to claim her, like a hunter reminding his prey that freedom was an illusion. Ada Ora switched off the phone and threw it into her bag. She told herself she would ignore him. He had paid her once. Their transaction was complete. Her mother was safe now. There was no reason to go back. But reality, cruel as always, reminded her otherwise. The bills didn't stop. Medications, checkups, aftercare, the money leaked away faster than she could control. The envelope she had clutched so tightly was already thinning, its power shrinking with every passing day. And though her mother smiled with gratitude, Ada Ora could not escape the gnawing fear. What happens when the money is gone? The billionaire knew this. That was why he had sent that message. For days, she resisted. She focused on her mother, on the routines of care, on pretending that her life was normal again. But at night, when the hospital corridors grew quiet, her mind betrayed her. She thought of the way he looked at her, calm yet predatory, as if she were a puzzle he was determined to solve. She thought of his words, "You will come to understand that survival demands sacrifice." And deep down, she knew her story with him had not ended. The next time the message came, it was not a request. It was an instruction. Friday, 8 p.m., the same hotel. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, to erase the memory of that night forever. But instead, she sat in silence, tears rolling down her cheeks, because she knew that no matter how much she hated him, she could not afford to defy him. Friday arrived like a storm cloud. She dressed in silence, wearing a plain blouse and skirt, her face bare of makeup. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She looked older, harder, as though the innocence had been stripped from her eyes and replaced with shadows. The black SUV arrived once again. The driver, expressionless, opened the door. Ada Ora climbed in, her body heavy with dread. The city lights blurred past her window, mocking her with their brightness. She felt like she was sinking deeper into a pit she could not climb out of. When she entered the suite, the billionaire was waiting. This time, he did not stand by the window with wine. He was seated, relaxed, as though he had known she would come. "You're late," he said calmly. Ada Ora said nothing. She stood frozen by the door, her hands clenched. He smiled faintly, tilting his head. "But you came. That's what matters." The evening unfolded differently this time. He did not rush. Instead, he talked. He asked about her mother, about her life, about her dreams. His questions were sharp, almost intrusive, as though he were peeling away her layers piece by piece. Ada Ora resisted at first, answering with clipped words, refusing to meet his eyes. But his presence was disarming. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had never heard the word no. Slowly, against her will, she found herself speaking. She told him about her childhood, about her father's death, about the endless struggle to survive. She spoke of the shame she carried for what she had done, the bitterness that ate at her. He listened, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back, swirling the liquid in his glass. "You think you are broken," he said. "But you're not. You are exactly what this world creates when it crushes the weak and demands survival. That's why you intrigue me, Ira. Not because of your body, because of your fight." The words unsettled her. They were not tender, but they pierced something inside her. For years, she had been invisible to the world, just another poor girl struggling to survive. But in his eyes, she was seen, not as a victim, but as something rare. And that frightened her more than anything else. Their nights together became more frequent. Each time, she told herself it would be the last. Each time, she returned, hating herself more. The money he gave her covered her mother's treatments, paid for better care, even allowed her to buy small comforts she had never known. But with each payment came a deeper entanglement, a tightening chain around her soul. The city began to notice. Neighbors whispered about her sudden glow, the expensive clothes she now wore, the cab rides she could afford. Friends from the past resurfaced, their smiles sharp with envy. Rumors spread like wildfire. Adaora had found a sponsor. Some called her lucky. Others called her cursed. She avoided their eyes, ashamed yet trapped. But it was not only society that judged her. Her own heart turned against her. At night, when she lay awake, she felt the battle raging within her. She hated him for stealing her innocence, for turning her into something she had vowed never to be. Yet she could not deny the pull she felt when he called. There was something about his presence, his confidence, his control, his hidden pain, that drew her in like a moth to a flame. One evening, after another night in his suite, she found herself staring at him as he slept. For the first time, she saw not the billionaire, not the predator, but a man. His face was softened by sleep, his brow furrowed as though even in dreams he could not escape his demons. In that moment she wondered, who was he really? What had shaped him into this man who bought innocence like a commodity? Her answer came unexpectedly. Weeks later, during a quiet dinner, he spoke of his past. He told her about betrayal, about a family that had abandoned him when he needed them most. He spoke of losing everything and rebuilding with nothing but anger and ambition. His empire had been born not of joy, but of revenge. Wealth had become his shield, power his weapon. And yet, in his voice, there was an emptiness that no fortune could fill. For the first time, Adaora saw him as more than her tormentor. She saw him as a man scarred by his own battles, lonely despite the billions in his account. And that was dangerous. Because in that moment, pity crept into her heart. And where pity lives, attachment soon follows. She began to question herself. Was she still here only for the money? Or was there something else, something unspoken, that tied her to him? The more time she spent with him, the blurrier the lines became. He never said the word love, but his actions shifted. He no longer treated her like a transaction. He spoke to her, confided in her, even laughed with her. At times, he looked at her as though she were more than a prize, perhaps even a cure for his loneliness. But Adaora knew better than to trust appearances. For every moment of softness, there was a shadow. He controlled her time, demanded her presence, reminded her that she belonged to him. She was trapped between two worlds, the warmth of his rare tenderness and the cold steel of his dominance. One night, as she prepared to leave his suite, she found a folder carelessly left on the table. Curiosity, sharp and insistent, tugged at her. She opened it and froze. Inside were photographs. Not of her, but of her father. Her heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. There were documents too, business records, old letters, evidence of a connection she could not yet piece together. Her hands shook as she closed the folder, her mind spinning. Why did the billionaire have records of her father? What did he know? Could it be that their meeting was never chance at all? The room suddenly felt suffocating. She looked at him, still seated across the room, sipping his drink as though nothing had changed. But in that moment, everything shifted. This was not just a dangerous attachment anymore. This was a tangled web of secrets, betrayal, and hidden truths. Adora's story with the billionaire was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. She thought selling her innocence would be the end of her pain. But what she didn't know was that it was only the beginning. The billionaire wasn't done with her, and the price of her sacrifice was far greater than she ever imagined. Will her mother's recovery bring peace, or will this deal drag her deeper into a world she cannot escape? Don't miss part 2 of this story. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join me as we uncover what happens next.